Here's a thought experiment for you. Imagine you're sitting with someone you love, a parent, a sibling, a friend, and then they're just gone. Not gone in the modern sense, where gone means hospital, funeral home, death certificate, estate lawyer, a notification on your phone from an app that still sends them birthday reminders. Just gone. One moment they're there, and the next they're not. And you have absolutely no framework, no religion, no philosophy, no science, no YouTube video to explain what just happened or where they went. What do you do with that? This is the situation every single human being on this planet faced for the vast majority of our existence. And how they responded to it is one of the most illuminating, surprising, and genuinely moving stories in all of human history. Because here's the thing, ancient humans didn't just passively experience death and move on. They obsessed over it. They built elaborate rituals around it. They developed some of the most sophisticated symbolic thinking in the ancient world in direct response to it. Some of the oldest art we've ever found is connected to death. Some of the oldest evidence of spiritual belief is connected to death. Some of the most extraordinary evidence of human empathy and community care is connected to death. Death didn't just happen to ancient humans. It shaped them. And it shapes us still, in ways most of us never stop to think about. So let's think about it. The first thing you need to understand is that early humans almost certainly did not have any concept of natural death. Think about that for a second. We take for granted this idea that people just die, that bodies wear out, that age catches up with you, that the heart eventually stops. We find it uncomfortable and scary, but we understand it mechanically. Ancient humans didn't. Not for a very long time. And that fundamental incomprehension changed everything about how they responded to death. If you're a modern person and you want to understand how prehistoric humans felt about death, you need to strip away basically every framework you currently have. No biology lessons. No religious tradition that has spent thousands of years developing sophisticated answers. No philosophy. No prior generations who already worked through the hard questions and left you a map. You're starting from absolute zero. And here's what you're left with. You have the observation that things that were alive become not alive. You have the experience of that loss, which is devastating in any era. And you have a brain that is relentlessly, furiously dedicated to finding patterns and explanations for the things it observes. That brain is not going to accept "it just happened" as an answer. It is going to generate explanations. It is going to construct meaning. It cannot help itself. Pattern finding and meaning making are essentially what the human brain is for. This is where the story gets fascinating. Here's something that very few people know. The oldest clear evidence of intentional burial on Earth is over 300,000 years old. And it doesn't belong to modern humans. It belongs to Homo naledi, a hominid species we only discovered in 2013, when a team of researchers crawled through a narrow, terrifying passage in the Rising Star cave system in South Africa and found a chamber full of ancient remains. Hundreds of bones, from at least 15 individuals, deep inside a cave system with no other obvious explanation for why they were there. The site is called the Naledi Chamber, and it has generated some of the most heated debate in paleoanthropology in recent memory. Because the researchers who found it argue, based on careful analysis, that Homo naledi was deliberately depositing their dead in this chamber, not dragging them in for predation, not being carried in by water, deliberately, with what appears to be intent. This is extraordinary for one specific reason. Homo naledi had a brain roughly a third the size of ours. If they were deliberately burying their dead, or at minimum deliberately setting their dead aside in a specific place, That behavior emerged far earlier and in a far simpler brain than we ever thought possible. The researchers also found what they describe as markings on the cave walls near the remains, simple engravings, geometric patterns, which raises a genuinely dizzying question. Were these marks connected to the dead? Were they a form of memorial, of communication, of something we don't even have a word for? We don't know. We may never know. But the possibility alone should make you pause. Because if something like ritualized response to death appeared in a small-brained hominin hundreds of thousands of years before modern humans arrived on the scene, then this behavior isn't just a human quirk. It might be something that emerges, almost inevitably, from any sufficiently social brain confronted with the disappearance of one of its kind. Death doesn't just produce grief. In the right kind of mind, it produces ceremony. When Homo sapiens arrive in the archaeological record, the evidence for intentional burial becomes dramatically richer, more elaborate, and more emotionally resonant. And none of it fits the brutal survival machine narrative we tend to have about ancient people. The Skull Cave in Israel contains graves dating back approximately 130,000 years. In one of them, a man was buried with a boar's jaw clenched in his hands, not placed nearby, held. Someone decided that this person should go into the ground, holding something significant. Someone thought about what he would need, or what he deserved, or what he meant. At Kafsa Cave, also in Israel, researchers found a grave containing the remains of a young child, buried with the antlers of a red deer, placed carefully across the body. The antlers were too large to have fit into the grave without being deliberately arranged. Someone went to the trouble of making them fit. Think about that for a moment. There's a dead child, and the people who loved that child didn't just cover the body. They went and found antlers. They carried them back. They arranged them carefully. They chose this. It cost them time and effort, and probably emotional agony. Why? Why would a group of people for whom survival was a genuine daily challenge spend finite energy decorating the grave of a child who couldn't help them anymore? Because they weren't just thinking about survival. They were thinking about meaning. They were thinking about what this small life had been worth and how that worth should be honored. They were doing what humans do. They were making the loss mean something. Now, here's the question that ancient humans were confronting with every burial, every death, every disappearance of someone they knew. Where did they go? Not, where did the body go? That was observable. Bodies returned to the earth. Ancient people could see that. What they couldn't see and couldn't accept was the disappearance of the person, the personality, the voice, the presence, the thing that made that specific individual recognizable and loved and real. People who study comparative religion and anthropology have noted something remarkable. Essentially, every culture ever studied, in every part of the world, regardless of how isolated or how complex, has developed some form of answer to this question. Some belief in what happens after death. The specifics vary wildly, but the existence of the belief is almost universal. That universality is a very strong signal. In human behavior and belief, when something appears independently in cultures with no contact with each other across thousands of miles and thousands of years, it usually means it's responding to something fundamental in human psychology. Not just a cultural accident. Not just something someone invented one day and the idea spread. Something that emerges from the structure of the human mind itself, confronting a specific problem. The problem of the missing person. Why would you put a perfectly good spear in a grave with a dead person? The most parsimonious explanation, the simplest one that accounts for the behavior, is that the people doing the burying believed the dead person was going somewhere and would need their things. Which means they believed the dead person still existed, in some form, somewhere, and that existence was continuous enough with their living existence that practical objects would still be relevant to them. This is an enormous cognitive leap, and it's a very old one. The grave goods at Sungir, a site in Russia dating back around 34,000 years, are among the most spectacular in the prehistoric archaeological record. 2 children were buried head to head in an elongated grave, and they were buried with thousands of ivory beads, which researchers have estimated took an almost incomprehensible amount of time to produce. Around 10,000 beads between them, each one individually carved from mammoth tusk. At an estimated production rate, making that many beads might have required around 10,000 hours of skilled labor. That's years of someone's working time. These children were also buried with ivory lances, carved mammoth figurines, fox teeth pendants, and what appears to have been a decorated headband. Now, think about the economics of that for a second. This is a community of hunter-gatherers. They're mobile. Everything they own, they carry. The production of 10,000 ivory beads represents an extraordinary investment of the most precious resource they have. Time that could have gone toward food, warmth, and survival. And they put all of it in the ground with 2 children. You do not do that unless those children mattered enormously to you. Unless honoring them mattered enormously to you. Unless what came after death mattered enormously to you. This is not a primitive culture indifferently discarding the dead. This is a culture for which death was one of the most significant events imaginable, demanding response, ceremony, investment, and grief expressed in the most concrete way they knew how. Through made things. Let's talk about the dead coming back. Because one of the most widespread and ancient beliefs connected to death isn't just that the dead go somewhere, it's that they return. Or at least, that they can. The anthropological record is saturated with evidence of ancestor veneration in ancient cultures. The belief that the dead retained a form of presence in the world, that they could influence the living, that their goodwill or displeasure mattered, that they needed to be remembered, fed, spoken to, and honored. This is not a primitive superstition that modernity has outgrown. It is one of the most enduring human ideas in history, present in some form on essentially every continent, in cultures ranging from the simplest to the most complex, and it may have very deep roots. Researchers who study Neanderthal behavior have noted something interesting at several Neanderthal sites. The presence of bones from the same individual returned to specific locations over long periods of time. Not all bones, just some. A skull kept at or returned to the place where someone lived. A specific bone handled repeatedly until it shows wear from human contact. This is suggestive, not conclusive. Archaeology rarely is, but suggestive of a relationship with the remains of the dead that goes beyond simply disposing of the body. A keeping, a tending, a continued relationship. Were Neanderthals decorating their dead, honoring their remains, keeping them present in some symbolic sense? Possibly. Tentatively. With appropriate scientific caution. But here's what isn't tentative. Neanderthals buried their dead. La Chapelle aux Saints in France, Shanidar Cave in Iraq, Kabara Cave in Israel. We have multiple sites where Neanderthal remains were found in what appear to be deliberate graves, positioned carefully, sometimes in fetal positions, sometimes accompanied by animal bones. 2 species, separated by hundreds of thousands of years of evolution, both developed the practice of treating the dead with a specific kind of deliberate care. That is not coincidence. That is something in the fabric of what it means to be a big-brained social primate, watching the people you know disappear. Here's something genuinely astonishing that tends to get overlooked in discussions of ancient death beliefs. The evidence strongly suggests that the dead were considered dangerous. This is almost universal in early mortuary practice across cultures. Not just the idea that the dead go somewhere and need things, but the idea that the transition from life to death is perilous, and that the dead in the wrong state or without proper care could come back and cause harm to the living. We find evidence of this in archaeological sites worldwide. Bodies pinned down by heavy stones, bodies buried with their feet removed or their legs broken so they couldn't walk back, bodies placed face down so they couldn't see where they'd come from. In some cases, what appears to be deliberate dismemberment before burial, not as an act of disrespect, but as a precaution. This sounds dark by modern standards, and it is. But here's the thing that makes it deeply human rather than primitive. This fear of the returning dead, this complex and ambivalent relationship with the deceased, demonstrates something crucial. It demonstrates that ancient humans understood the dead as agents, as beings with will and intent, capable of action, capable of return, capable of consequences. You don't take precautions against something that has no power. You don't pin down a rock. You pin down something that might, under the wrong circumstances, get up. The fear of the dead is, paradoxically, a profound expression of respect for them. It treats them as continuing to exist, continuing to be themselves, continuing to have the capacity to do things. And alongside this fear was the equally powerful belief in protective ancestors. The dead who could help, who could intercede, who could guide and guard. Many ancient cultures held both beliefs simultaneously, which makes complete psychological sense. The dead are powerful and potentially dangerous, and also they are our people. And our people, properly honored, properly sent, properly remembered, will use that power for us, rather than against us. This is not so different from complicated relationships we have with the living. There's sometimes an assumption in popular narratives about ancient life that people were somehow hardened to death. That because death was more common, more present, more immediately visible, it hurt less. That ancient people were somehow tougher or less emotionally vulnerable to loss. This is completely wrong. And the archaeological evidence makes this clear beyond any reasonable doubt. At the site of Romito, too, in Italy, researchers found the skeleton of a young person, believed to be between 17 and 19 years old at death, who had severe osteoarthritis that had left them unable to walk normally or care for themselves. This person lived through their disability, not for a short time, but for years, in a community that clearly chose to keep them alive when they could not feed themselves. When that person died, they were buried by their community. That's all the evidence we have. A burial. Bones with healed disease. But it's enough. It's more than enough. It tells you that the community mourned this person. That they had mourned before, probably many times, for this person, over the years of care. That the grief was not brief or casual, that it was sustained and real and expressed in the most permanent way they had. Grief, like love, is not a modern invention. It is as old as attachment. And attachment is older than our species. Think about that. Long before writing. Long before cities. Long before anything we might point to as civilization, there were people sitting with someone they loved through years of illness, bringing them food, keeping them warm, and then, when it was over, marking it, making it mean something, saying, this person was here, and that matters.